I was never supposed to be here. I keep telling myself that. Maybe if I hadn't decided to wander off the trail, none of this would have happened. But I can't change it now. It started as a solo hike through the dense wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. I'd heard about the area from forums, people raving about how untouched and remote it was. I craved that solitude, a break from the grind of city life. The trail was well marked at first. Towering pines loomed overhead, their tops swaying in the wind, blocking out the sun. Around midday, I spotted an offshoot trail, a narrow, barely visible path winding deeper into the forest. My curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't on any maps I'd downloaded, but the allure of finding something hidden pulled me in. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No rustling leaves, no bird calls. Just the sound of my boots crunching on the damp underbrush. That's when I noticed the first oddity, a series of large, perfectly circular impressions in the soil. They were spaced apart, almost like footprints, but much too large for any animal I could think of. My heart raced, but I pressed on. The air grew colder, and a faint mist crept through the trees. The path twisted and turned until I came to a clearing. In the middle of it stood an ancient-looking structure. A low, crumbling stone wall covered in moss and lichen. It seemed so out of place. As I approached, I noticed carvings etched into the stone. Symbols that looked alien, geometric but purposeful. A strange hum filled the air, so faint it was almost imperceptible. It wasn't coming from the structure, though. It felt like it was inside my head. I don't know why, but I reached out and touched one of the carvings. The stone was ice cold, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through my skull. That's when everything went black. I woke up sometime later. Minutes, hours, I don't know. The clearing was gone. The sky was a deep, unnatural shade of red, and the trees around me were warped, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and I couldn't hear a thing. Not even the sound of my own breathing. Panic set in as I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest seemed to change with every turn I took. Paths that were there a moment ago vanished behind me. The ground felt spongy, almost alive, and the mist thickened, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. Then I heard it. A distant, guttural sound. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. A mix of growling and clicking, echoing from the trees. I froze, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, closer, and my instincts screamed at me to run. I bolted in the opposite direction, crashing through the underbrush, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that noise. I didn't stop until I came to another clearing, this one filled with trees that looked burned. Their trunks blackened and split open. In the center was a massive tree stump, its surface carved with the same symbols I'd seen earlier. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. As I approached, the hum returned, louder than before. My vision blurred, and I felt a pull, like something was dragging me forward. My body wouldn't respond. I couldn't stop myself. The last thing I remember is a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar. When I woke up, I was lying on the main trail, the sun shining through the canopy above. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. My watch said 3 days had passed. I made it back to my car, but I haven't been the same since. Nightmares haunt me every night. Dreams of that red sky, those warped trees, and the thing that was chasing me. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my nails, the hum still echoing faintly in my ears. I tried reporting what happened, but no one believed me. They said I must have gotten lost and imagined it all. But I know what I saw, and I know I wasn't alone out there. Something was watching me, and I can't shake the feeling that it still is. People go missing in national parks more often than you'd think. Some cases make sense. They get lost, fall, or have an unfortunate run-in with wildlife. But others stick with you. The ones that don't have a clear explanation. The ones that leave you lying awake at night, wondering if you missed something. I'll never forget the summer of 2019. The summer I stopped believing everything could be explained. It started with a call from dispatch about a missing hiker in the Crescent Lake area. The man, Brian Kelser, was 33 and an experienced outdoorsman. He'd told friends he was heading up the Pine Hollow Trail for a solo hike, but never came back. His car was still in the parking lot, keys and wallet inside. I met up with 2 other rangers, Jenna and Alvarez, and we set out early the next morning. The trail was easy to follow for the first few miles. Dry dirt, scattered rocks, nothing unusual. But then we found something odd. About 5 miles in, the dirt path was abruptly cut by deep gouges in the earth, as if something massive had been dragged through the forest. We followed the marks. They led off the trail and into the thicker part of the woods, where the trees grew so close together it felt like they were swallowing the sunlight. That's when we found the first piece of evidence. A shoe, lying on its side. Brand new, barely scuffed, and it matched the description of the ones Brian had been wearing. Looks like he lost it running. Jenna said, frowning. Running from what? Alvarez asked, scanning the trees. The air felt different here, heavier, colder. We pressed on, following the drag marks and scattered pieces of gear, a torn strap from a backpack, a crumpled water bottle. It wasn't until we reached a small clearing that things really started to feel wrong. The ground was covered in ash, though there were no signs of fire. In the middle of the clearing stood a tree, or at least what I thought was a tree at first. Its bark was pale and smooth, almost like skin, and it pulsed faintly, as if it were alive. Jenna leaned closer to inspect it. "What the hell is this?" she muttered, reaching out to touch it. "Don't," I said quickly, grabbing her arm. I didn't know why, but everything in me screamed not to let her touch it. Then we heard it. A sound like distant whispers carried on the wind, too faint to make out words, but unmistakably human. Alvarez spun around, shining his flashlight into the trees. "Brian, is that you?" he called. No answer. The whispers grew louder, coming from all directions. I swear they weren't just random sounds. They were speaking, repeating the same phrase over and over, though none of us could understand it. That's when we saw the figure. It stood at the edge of the clearing just beyond the tree line, tall, impossibly thin, its limbs bending in ways that didn't seem natural. It didn't move toward us. It just watched. "What is that?" Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. None of us had an answer. We started backing away, but the thing moved, fast and silent, disappearing into the trees. The whispers stopped instantly, replaced by a deafening silence. We didn't stick around to see what would happen next. We radioed for backup and made our way back to the trail as quickly as we could. When we returned with a search team later that day, the clearing was gone. The drag marks, the tree, all of it, as if it had never been there. We'd never found Brian Kelser. His case remains open, like so many others. But I know what we saw. Something was out there that day, something not meant to be found. And sometimes, when I'm patrolling alone, I hear those whispers again. Faint, distant, calling me back to the forest. In my 20 years as a sheriff's deputy in central Montana, I've seen plenty of strange things, but nothing comes close to the Nichols case. I wish I could forget it, but I know I never will. It started on a crisp October afternoon in 2017. I was called to assist in the search for a missing family, a father, mother, and their teenage son who had failed to return from a day hike in the Bear Ridge Reserve. Their car was found parked at the trailhead, locked and untouched, but no one had seen them in over 24 hours. I joined a team of rangers and volunteers as we combed through the dense forest. Bear Ridge wasn't the kind of place people got lost easily. The trails were well maintained and mapped. Still, the Nichols family had vanished without a trace. Around sunset, I decided to check a less traveled area, a meadow known as Hart's Hollow. It was marked on maps but rarely visited, mostly because people said the place felt off. I thought it was just superstition. When I reached the meadow, the air changed immediately. It was colder than it should have been, and there was an eerie stillness to the place. No wind, no birds, not even the buzz of insects. The grass, tall and silvered by frost, shimmered in the fading light. That's where I found their first sign. A blue scarf caught on a thorn bush at the edge of the field. It belonged to Rachel Nichols, the mother. I radioed my team and let them know I was onto something, but before I could hear their response, the static cut out. Then I noticed something strange. The center of the field looked wrong. The grass didn't move naturally. It seemed to ripple, like the surface of a lake. I stepped closer, my hand on my holster. My instinct screamed for me to stop, but I pushed forward. That's when I saw them. The Nichols family was standing in the middle of the field, completely still, their backs to me. They weren't huddled together or shouting for help. They were just standing there, perfectly spaced apart, staring at something I couldn't see. "Mr. Nichols," I called out. "Sheriff's Department. Are you all right?" No response. I moved closer, my heart pounding. "Rachel?" Danny, still nothing. They didn't so much as flinch. I was about 20 feet away when I felt it. A vibration under my boots. It wasn't strong, but it was rhythmic, like a pulse. That's when I noticed something even worse. Their heads began to tilt upward, slowly, as if they were watching something rise into the sky. But when I looked, there was nothing there, just a pale blue expanse darkening with the coming night. "Hey," I shouted again. "We need to go. Now." As I stepped forward, I felt the vibration intensify, almost like the ground was alive. Suddenly, the air seemed to thicken, pressing against me like a wall. I couldn't move any closer. The family began to dissolve, not vanish in the blink of an eye, but melt into the air, their bodies fading into translucent wisps of light. I watched in horror as their forms grew fainter and fainter, until all that remained were faint outlines. And then, nothing. I stumbled backward, falling onto the cold grass. The pulse in the ground stopped. The oppressive air lifted, and the field was empty. When I finally managed to radio back to the team, they found me shaking at the edge of the meadow. I told them what I saw, but they didn't believe me. Who would? We searched the field for hours, found nothing but the scarf I'd picked up. The Nichols family was never found. No bodies, no footprints leading away. Nothing. It's like they were plucked out of existence. I haven't been back to Hart's Hollow since, and I don't plan to. Whatever happened to that family wasn't natural. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that faint vibration, feeling that invisible pressure. And sometimes I dream of the field and see shadows where the Nichols family once stood.